Ethan Harper, a seasoned marine biologist, was documenting underwater life near the barrier reef when a colossal whale abruptly swallowed him whole. His team watched in horror, unable to react as the gentle giant closed its mouth. Ethan emerged minutes later, gasping for air, revealing a shocking discovery that turned everyone pale. "You won't believe what I saw down there," Ethan said as soon as the air returned to his lungs. He looked excited rather than terrified, even though he had just been inside a whale's mouth. "Dude, are you okay?" his teammate worriedly asked. Everyone was more concerned about Ethan's well-being, which was understandable, keeping in mind the fact they had just watched Ethan being swallowed alive. "We thought you were whale food, man," Claire, one of Ethan's teammates, said as she pulled him out of the water and onto the boat. Ethan was still breathing heavily, but his eyes showed a strange twinkle. "Guys, listen!" Ethan tried again. He had seen something inside the whale's mouth that couldn't wait. "I just made the discovery of a lifetime." Now, everyone quieted down, eager to hear what Ethan had seen. He took a deep breath and began to recount what had happened in grave detail, with every member of his team hanging at his lips to hear what happened next. But why had the whale swallowed Ethan? What had Ethan seen inside the whale's mouth? And why was Ethan released? A few moments before being taken in the mouth of a whale, Ethan had been documenting the different ecosystems around the barrier reef. He had been tasked with capturing footage of rare marine behaviors, and boy, did he find what he was looking for. As he swam around, he suddenly heard his team going haywire in his earpiece, telling him to swim to the surface ASAP. But Ethan was in the middle of capturing what he thought to be the money shot, so he wasn't going anywhere. Suddenly, he began to feel some kind of pull from behind, and a big shadow fell over him. Before he knew it, everything was pitch black, and he had no idea what happened. When he turned on the flashlight on his camera, his stomach dropped. He looked right at a wall of baleen plates. When he shone his flashlight down, he saw a giant pink tongue. Ethan immediately knew where he was, but was stunned by the idea alone. It was very, very rare for a whale to want to feed on a human, so Ethan almost didn't believe it, even though he was right there, inside a whale's mouth. Meanwhile, Ethan's teammates, who had been in the water with him, were in a state of panic. They had watched their friend get sucked into the mouth of a whale, and there was no way for him to come out on his own. They immediately swam to the surface to communicate with the crew on the boat, hoping they would know what to do in this situation. Time was ticking as more whales arrived to feed, and it was hard to tell them all apart. Claire had her eyes on the whale who had eaten Ethan and wasn't planning on leaving it out of her sight. She floated in the water, suppressing the tears in her eyes so her goggles wouldn't fog up, praying Ethan would have enough air left in his tank. Suddenly, the whale began to swim away, and Claire quickly rose to the surface to tell her team on the boat. She wasn't even fully out of the water yet when the boat took off in pursuit of the whale. The air was tense, and no one said anything. With every fiber of their being, they were all silently hoping that Ethan would come out of that whale's mouth alive. Inside the whale's mouth, Ethan was debating on his next steps when he suddenly felt the whale moving. He also noticed that the whale's throat would probably be too small for him to fit through, but he really didn't want to find that out through experience. He had to find a way to make the whale release him. But how do you communicate with such a large animal? Ethan reached forward and tapped the whale's massive tongue, hoping it would retreat and give him some room to escape. Instead, the tongue shifted upward, pressing against the roof of the whale's mouth, trapping him further. "No, no, no," he muttered, frustration building. Each movement he made only seemed to agitate the whale more, making the mammoth tongue press even tighter. His flashlight flickered, and he could barely see his surroundings. The pressure from the tongue squeezing him was unbearable, and he quickly realized his air supply was dwindling. Fumbling in the dark, he yanked his gauge closer, heart pounding as he saw how little oxygen he had left. "Gotta think, Ethan," he told himself. He couldn't afford to panic, not yet. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan, but the rising tide of anxiety kept crashing into him. Ethan pushed himself up and swung his legs toward the baleen plates. He needed the whale to open its mouth and let him go. With every ounce of strength, he kicked repeatedly, hoping it would irritate the whale enough to release him. "Come on, move!" he yelled into the inky blackness. Each kick reverberated through his body, but the massive animal didn't budge. The frustration gnawed at him as he strained against his increasingly tight confines. Nothing seemed to work. As each minute passed, Ethan's breathing grew more rapid and shallow. Panic slithered in, coiling around his chest. Stay calm, he whispered to himself, but the words barely broke through the fear. He could feel the clock ticking down, the darkness closing in. "Come on, open up!" He pounded against the tongue again, but his strength was waning. He struggled to hold on to hope as his breaths became more laboured. Ethan pressed his back against the whale's tongue, straining to keep his breath steady. His fingers shook as he felt for his gauge again. The pressure in his tank had dropped even further, and his lungs were starting to burn. "I have to make it out," he whispered hoarsely. Fighting to stay calm, he desperately searched for any sliver of light, anything that could guide him to safety. But all he found was darkness and his dwindling air supply. The team's boat surged through the water, following the whale with Ethan trapped inside. "Coast Guard, do you copy?" Claire shouted into the radio, her voice laced with urgency. "We need assistance with a man swallowed by a whale. We are in pursuit." Her fingers clenched the radio as she adjusted the throttle, keeping a steady eye on the whale's path. The Coast Guard's crackled response was barely audible over the roaring waves and the team's anxious breaths. "Coast Guard, has anything like this ever happened before?" "Any advice?" Claire asked, her voice desperate for any piece of useful information. The static-filled pause from the other end felt like an eternity. Finally, a voice came through. "Negative. We've never dealt with a situation quite like this. Keep a safe distance and monitor his condition best you can." Claire's heart sank, but she knew they couldn't just wait for a miracle. They needed a plan, fast. The Coast Guard's confirmation that they had no experience with such incidents hit hard. "There's nothing more you can do," Claire pleaded into the radio. "I'm afraid not," came the somber reply. The reality of their situation settled in as waves crashed against the boat. The team exchanged worried glances, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear they were on their own, and the gravity of Ethan's perilous situation weighed heavily on everyone. As despair crept in, Claire's mind raced for solutions. Then a spark. "Wait, what if we try something they do with trained whales?" she blurted out. The team turned to her, puzzled but hopeful. "Maybe we can't talk to the whale, but we can still influence its behaviour." She quickly explained her rough idea, drawing on every nature documentary she'd ever seen. The team leaned in, desperation turning to tentative hope as she laid out her plan. "Here's what we're going to do," Claire began, everyone's attention fixed on her. "We can't communicate with the whale directly, but we can try to manipulate its movements." She outlined her plan, using gestures to describe how they would attempt to guide the whale's actions. "It's a long shot, but it might be our only chance," she concluded. The team nodded, absorbing the plan. They were ready to try anything to save Ethan, rallying behind Claire's unconventional strategy. "What if we throw a bunch of fish into the ocean to get the whale to open up again?" Claire suggested, her voice mixed with hope and urgency. The team looked at each other, considering the idea. It was unconventional, sure, but they were running out of options. "It might just be crazy enough to work," one teammate muttered. The idea of using fish to lure the whale to release Ethan was a gamble, but it sparked a new energy among the crew. "Hold on, can we even do that?" "What about the legal stuff?" another team member asked, concern wrinkling his brow. "And do we have enough fish on board?" Claire frowned, considering the complications. "We need to make sure we're not breaking any laws here," she added, her mind racing through the implications. The team debated the feasibility and legality of such an action, understanding it was a long shot, but also a potential lifeline for Ethan. Determined to try anything to save Ethan, the team decided to reach out to the Coast Guard for permission. Coast Guard, this is Rescue Team Alpha, requesting permission to deploy fish to entice a whale to release our man, Claire urgently communicated over the radio. The silence that followed was tense. Every second waiting for a response felt like an eternity as the waves slapped against the hull, the ocean indifferent to their desperation. The Coast Guard's response came after a tense pause. "We understand the urgency of your situation," the voice crackled over the radio. "We're considering your request. Stand by." The team exchanged anxious glances, hope flickering in their eyes. They understood the Coast Guard needed to weigh the risks of such an unusual rescue method. It was a long shot, but it was their best shot at getting Ethan back safely. They waited, hopeful and desperate. Finally, the Coast Guard's voice came through the radio again. "Permission granted. Proceed with your plan." Relief washed over the team as they scrambled to prepare. "Okay, let's get those fish ready and make this count," Claire instructed, her voice firm with renewed determination. The team hustled, gathering all the fish they could find on board. As they readied themselves to execute their risky strategy, they knew they were about to face one of their biggest challenges yet. Within minutes, the Coast Guard confirmed that a boat carrying the whale's favourite fish was on its way. "We'll be there shortly," the voice promised over the radio. The team breathed a collective sigh of relief. "All right, let's get ready to implement the plan," Claire urged. They checked their gear, making sure everything was set up perfectly. The ocean stretched around them, waves crashing as the tension grew, everyone anxiously awaiting the Coast Guard's arrival. The crew huddled together on the deck, their eyes fixed on the horizon. "Where's the Coast Guard?" "It's been too long," muttered one teammate, pacing nervously. Claire tried to maintain calm, but her thoughts were on Ethan, trapped somewhere in the darkness. "Hold tight, he's strong," she reassured the group, though she couldn't shake the uncertainty gnawing at her. The minutes dragged as they scanned the water, the sinking sun casting long shadows across the deck. Finally, the Coast Guard's boat came into view, packed with fish. "Here they come!" Claire yelled, relief washing over her face. The team quickly got to work, hauling the boxes of fish onto their deck and setting up the feeding strategy. "Everyone in position?" Claire called out. "Ready!" came the replies. With all eyes on the whale, they began to implement the plan that could mean life or death for their teammate. The team gathered at the edge of the deck, fish in hand. "Let's hope this works," Claire muttered as she signaled for them to begin. One by one, the fish were flung into the water. The team held their breath, watching as the chum floated out and hoping it would lure the whale to open its mouth. "It has to work," someone whispered. They were down to their final cards and knew Ethan's life depended on this strategy. Inside the whale, Ethan struggled against the darkness, still desperate to find a way out. He tapped on the slick walls, feeling his air run low and his strength draining fast. "Please, let me out," he murmured to the emptiness. He had no clue that his team was just outside, throwing fish into the water. Each minute passed in suffocating silence as he pressed against every surface, hoping to find an escape route. Ethan's breathing became shallow as he felt the walls closing in. He feared suffocation, but he had to keep trying. He tapped frantically on every surface within reach, hoping for some response. His palms slid against the slippery baleen plates, fingers searching for any small gap that could offer escape. His flashlight flickered, throwing fleeting shadows across the whale's vast mouth. He couldn't see much, but he kept tapping, praying the whale would react. After a few tense moments, the water around Ethan shifted, pulling him towards the baleen plates. "Something's happening," he murmured, feeling a swell of movement that gave him hope. The whale's massive body stirred, responding to Ethan's relentless tapping and the tantalizing scent of fish wafting through the water outside. He felt the current grow stronger, and he tightened his grip on his camera, bracing himself for whatever was coming next. The whale's mouth cracked open, just enough for Ethan to sense the light creeping in. The current pulling him forward intensified, and he could feel the suction urging him closer to the exit. The whale's massive tongue moved beneath him, and he held his breath as the giant creature opened up slowly. He fought against the current to keep his balance, readying himself to be pushed through the narrow opening. As Ethan was being pulled out, he spotted something remarkable along the whale's walls. Even in the dim light, he could see a collection of unusual barnacles and strange growths attached to the slick surface. It was an extraordinary sight, like an entire miniature ecosystem thriving within the mouth of a giant. He marveled for a moment, then quickly snapped his camera to capture the bizarre scene before he would be carried out by the rushing water. The sight amazed Ethan as he clutched his camera, knowing this was a once-in-a-lifetime view. He snapped a few more photos, determined to record the critical moment before being pulled completely free. He could feel the grip of the whale's mouth loosening, and the light from outside grew brighter. "Almost there," he murmured. He felt his air supply running low, but he knew he'd have to surface fast once he was free. With his air nearly depleted, Ethan fought against the currents and kicked toward the surface as fast as he could. His breaths were short and labored, each one feeling like it could be his last. "Almost there," he urged himself as the light above drew nearer. His lungs burned, but he pushed onward, desperate to break free. The water around him grew lighter, and he could finally see the faint shimmer of sunlight. Ethan broke through the surface, gasping for air. He clutched his gear tightly, relieved to finally be free of the whale. "Yes! Yes!" he cried out between ragged breaths. The taste of fresh air filled his lungs as he savoured the warm sunlight on his face. He tore off his mouthpiece and swam aimlessly, rejoicing in his freedom. It was a victory he would never forget, even if he still needed to reach the safety of the boat. After regaining his composure, Ethan turned to find the team's boat. But to his shock, the boat was nowhere in sight. "What? Where are you guys?" he shouted, spinning around in the water. He realized he was all alone, drifting in the middle of the open sea. The taste of relief soured quickly, replaced by the grim reality of his situation. His heart pounded as he scanned the endless horizon, searching for any sign of help. Desperate, Ethan bobbed in the water, searching the horizon for the familiar outline of his team's boat. "They have to be out here somewhere," he muttered to himself, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare of the sun. He squinted as he scanned the endless ocean, but no matter how far he strained his vision, he couldn't spot his team. The waves bobbed around him, leaving him feeling small in the vast sea. Ethan yanked off his goggles to clear his blurred vision, hoping for a better view. Come on," he muttered, trying to stay focused despite the panic rising in his chest. He treaded water and searched intently, looking in every direction. He had to spot them soon before his strength ran out. He strained his eyes, hoping to see the boat's familiar shape cutting through the waves, but all he could see was the endless horizon. Waves crashed into Ethan, spraying his face with salt water and making it hard to see or breathe. He gasped for air between the rolling swells, trying to keep his head above water. "Come on, Ethan, keep it together," he muttered, fighting to maintain control. He was battered by each new wave, flailing to stay afloat as the currents tossed him around. He wiped the salt from his eyes and tried to find his bearings. Exhaustion crept in as Ethan struggled against the waves, his muscles aching from swimming. He knew he needed to find the boat quickly if he wanted to survive. "I can't keep this up," he panted, his breaths growing shallow. Each kick felt like a weight dragging him deeper into the ocean. He turned in the water, searching frantically for any sign of rescue. "I can't give up," he muttered, forcing himself to keep moving despite the fatigue. Realizing he was far from the barrier reef, Ethan faced the harsh truth that he was in the middle of the open ocean. The familiar coral structures and marine life that had been his guideposts were nowhere to be seen. "How did I drift so far?" he wondered aloud. Without a clear reference point, he felt increasingly disoriented. He had to accept that he was alone, with no solid ground beneath him and no clear path to safety. With no land in sight, Ethan knew he couldn't waste his dwindling energy. He lay back in the water, trying to float and remain hopeful. "Stay calm, stay focused," he repeated to himself, though panic simmered just beneath the surface. He breathed deeply, trying to regain his strength while the waves bobbed him up and down. He would have to trust that his team was out there somewhere and would find him before it was too late. On the boat, Claire scanned the horizon, desperately searching for any sign of Ethan. She squinted at a shape in the distance, unsure what it was. "Hey, over there!" she yelled, waving the crew to her side of the deck. "I see something!" The team rushed to her side, peering through binoculars to confirm her sighting. They strained their eyes as the shape drifted in the waves, barely visible through the glare of the sun. Despite being close to the whale, Claire grew increasingly concerned that they might have followed the wrong one. "I can't believe it," she muttered, feeling frustration gnaw at her resolve. She looked back at the crew, their faces pale and exhausted. They had been trailing this whale for hours, trusting it was the one that swallowed Ethan. "We can't give up now," she told them. They had to keep searching and make sure they didn't miss any signs. Claire pointed out a small dot on the horizon, convinced it was Ethan. "Look, over there," she urged, her arms stretched out toward the distant shape. "That has to be him!" She scanned the water through her binoculars, her heart racing with hope. The crew exchanged uncertain glances, but she was adamant. "I'm sure of it," she insisted, her voice firm. "We can't just sit here while he's out there." The team hesitated, reminding Claire they had to wait for the Coast Guard's plan. "But we don't have time," Claire protested, her voice rising. What if that really is Ethan? The crew remained uncertain, looking back at the captain. "We can't just abandon the plan," he replied sternly. "We need to be sure we're not making things worse." Claire's frustration boiled over, but she knew she had to stay calm to convince them. When the captain refused to move, Claire pushed him aside and set the boat at full speed toward the dot. "Claire, what are you doing?" the captain yelled, stumbling back. "Getting Ethan back," she snapped, eyes fixed on the horizon. The boat surged forward, engine roaring as it cut through the waves. The rest of the team held on tight, bracing against the sudden acceleration. They couldn't deny her determination, even if they weren't entirely sure of her course. As they neared the dot on the horizon, the team fell silent, realizing it might indeed be Ethan. "I think it's really him," one crewmate whispered, straining to see through the spray. "Get the life preserver ready," the captain ordered. They scanned the water anxiously, hearts pounding as they got closer. The shape slowly grew clearer, bobbing up and down with the waves. Each second felt like an hour as they held their breaths, hoping against hope. The boat approached the struggling figure, confirming it was their missing teammate. "It's him! It's really him!" Claire shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. The team gathered at the edge of the boat, their eyes locked on Ethan as he bobbed in the waves. He was barely staying afloat, his movements sluggish. "Get that life preserver over here," the captain barked, and within seconds, the orange ring was tossed into the water, inches from Ethan's grasp. Just as Ethan began to lose consciousness, the boat reached his side. "He's fading! We've got to hurry!" a crewmate shouted. The waves threatened to push Ethan under as his fingers slipped off the life preserver. "Come on, Ethan, hold on!" Claire cried desperately. She could see his eyes fluttering as he struggled to focus. The team maneuvered closer, each second feeling like an hour as they extended a pole toward him to latch onto. Claire jumps in without hesitation. Claire jumped into the water, grabbing Ethan and pulling him to safety. She hooked her arm around his shoulder and signaled for the team to pull them both in. "I've got him! I've got him!" she called out. With every ounce of strength, she fought against the waves to keep Ethan afloat. The life preserver slipped around him, and the crew heaved them both back onto the boat, their hands raw and blistered from the effort. The team helped lift Ethan onto the boat, where he gasped for air and regained his breath. "Ethan, buddy, can you hear us?" a crewmate asked as they laid him gently on the deck. Ethan coughed and nodded weakly, his chest heaving as he sucked in the salty air. "Yeah, I'm okay," he rasped, voice hoarse from the struggle. They wrapped him in a blanket, and he finally began to regain some colour, looking up at his rescuers. Ethan, still in shock, shared the incredible discovery he made inside the whale's mouth. "You're not going to believe this," he said breathlessly. "Inside that whale, I saw something that shouldn't exist. I got photos too." The team listened eagerly, leaning in closer as he explained what he found. "I'm telling you, it's a game changer." His eyes lit up with excitement as he fumbled through his gear, preparing to show them the photos he had captured. Eagerly, Ethan told them about the thought-to-be-extinct fish. "It was incredible," he said, voice trembling with excitement. "I saw a whole school of them inside the whale's mouth." He flipped through his camera, showing the team photo after photo of the elusive fish. Their bright scales glimmered in the dim light of the whale's massive mouth. The crew exchanged stunned looks. "This will change everything," Claire murmured. "We've got to get these back to the lab." Back on dry land, Ethan reviewed his footage, documenting every detail of his experience inside the whale. He played back the video, recounting the remarkable journey to an eager audience of marine biologists and researchers. "Here's where I noticed the first one," he explained, pointing to a flickering shadow on the screen. "And there's the whole group." The room buzzed with excitement as each new frame revealed the rare fish in all their glory. The discovery of the extinct fish species generated significant interest from the wildlife facility. "We want to partner with you to study this species," the director told Ethan, shaking his hand firmly. "This is a remarkable find, and we're prepared to provide all the resources necessary." Researchers gathered around Ethan, peppering him with questions and praising his courageous efforts. "I'm just glad we've got this chance to learn more," Ethan replied, humbled by their admiration. Ethan was recognized and awarded a medal for his remarkable contribution to marine biology. "Your bravery and dedication have opened a new chapter in our understanding of marine life," the presenter declared as Ethan stood on stage, beaming at the applause. He looked out into the crowd and caught sight of Claire and the crew, all cheering him on. He couldn't have done it without them. He raised the medal high, sharing the moment with his entire team. Ethan's story and the footage became a powerful tool for marine conservation awareness. News outlets broadcasted the incredible images, and schools included his work in their curricula. "We must protect these creatures and their habitats," Ethan urged in interviews, emphasizing the fragility of the ocean's delicate ecosystems. People listened, inspired by his incredible journey and the rare glimpse inside the depths of the ocean. His discovery became a rallying cry for a new era of marine protection.